So I find myself here today, standing again at the well, feeling exposed, risking the exposure, because at this point in life, what is there to lose? It's all to gain. Now ask us again, what do we love? What will it cost? How much am I prepared to pay? So welcome to Jawbone. Fancy a bit of Sunday school? So the teacher was thirsty, wasn't he? The teacher was thirsty. It was the middle of the day, and he'd sent the disciples off. They'd gone into town, jogged into town to get some food. I am paraphrasing. This isn't chapter and verse. Bear with me. And he makes his way to the well. Now, the first thing we should know about the well, this is no ordinary well. This is no everyday well. This is the well of Jacob himself. Jacob of the Old Testament, Jacob of Israel, Jacob who is Israel in a fashion, hugely mythological, auspicious place. And symbolically, at a well like that, you could imagine that extremely quote-unquote important people are waiting to meet Jesus. Jesus has been a little circumspect so far as to quite who he is and what he is up to. He is cryptic on occasion. So waiting for him is a very unexpected figure, and this is the figure he will announce himself to. Well, first of all, the woman is a Samaritan. Now, the Jews are not quite at war with the Samaritans, but they are definitely, for the most part, not talking. So don't talk to the Samaritans. And secondly, if you are a Jewish man, absolutely positively do not be speaking to a Samaritan woman. And thirdly, this is a woman that, because of certain lifestyle choices, the Samaritans themselves are not speaking to. This woman is a triple threat. This woman is what you would call otherly. Now, she is as otherly as a strand of Siberian larch trees, if you can imagine them. She is as otherly as the screech of an owl after midnight, Rabbi, stay away. Rabbi, move on. Well, what do we know about Jesus? We know he doesn't roll like that. There is a sacred circle about this moment. And this woman, who is in Orthodoxy, we call her the luminous one, she kind of hisses at Jesus and says, look, why are you here? Why are we even conversing? Because he's actually asked her, can I have a drink of water? Would you get me a drink of water from the bottom of the well? He is already committed taboo in a fashion. He has already been reckless with his boundaries. And she says, listen, you're not meant to be talking to me. You don't even have a bucket to draw this well water up. And you know that this is a very important well. For Jacob drank from this well. His cattle gathered here and were given water from this well. His sons have drunk from this well. And Jesus takes that all in and he says, yeah, sure, that's great, wonderful water, but it's going to run out in the end. Now, me, if you actually knew who I was, if you really knew who was standing in front of you, it is you that would be asking me for the water, because I am privy to a kind of water that comes up from the inside. This is a kind of water that never runs out. This has a hint of the eternal about it, Well, this strange, angular, weird way of talking that Christ does so often and confuses so many people by it, she rolls with it and she looks, it's the heat of the day. She says, I would wish for water like that. It doesn't sound so bad, actually, when you put it like that. Water that never runs out. And he says, great, well, you go get your husband and let's do this. And she says, I don't have a husband. And he says, no, you don't. You've had 5 already. Now, this is when Jesus does what he sometimes does. He brings what you call the spook, and we can feel the hair going up on the back of the neck as he reveals something to this woman he could not possibly know about her. Exposure is one of the Druid's gifts. Well, she comes back and she sort of recognizes something of the person she's speaking to. So she says, okay, you are a prophet of some kind. You have information tucked into your cloak that you shouldn't have. So I have a question for you. She bounces back. If you are such a prophet, tell me this. There is a big question about where we should worship, because you Jews say that we should worship in Jerusalem at temple, but we Samaritans, we worship on the mountain. Which is it, prophet? Well, he says, mountain or temple. To be honest, there's an hour coming when neither of these things will mean more than the other. What really matters is that you pray in spirit and you pray in truth. So he's kind of walked round her inquiry and he's deepened it. Well, now she can feel that this is no ordinary man. And she says, well, these are all big questions, these conversations we're having, and I guess they won't really be wrapped up until Christ arrives. The Messiah arrives, long waited for figure. And then he says, I who right now stands before you is he. I who right now stands before you is he. Now, part of the wild genius of the New Testament and part of the frustration of the New Testament is that it often alludes to things that it doesn't then flesh out. Because what we know is after the conversation that they have, the Samaritan woman, the luminous one, she runs back to the people. I mean, something has happened now that it doesn't matter whether they're talking to her or not. She's going to be talking to them. And she says something like this. He told me everything I ever did. He told me everything I ever did. So that would imply at some point there'd been a longer discourse, a longer conversation, and he had opened up for her own life, the intrigues of it. And I don't think he did that to shame her. He did it to free her. He did it to unearth something quite wonderful. In a way, he has exposed her to the reality or the possibility of heaven. As I think about heaven now, it sounds like a rather tired word. The angels and the clouds and the harps and all of that kind of stuff. I sometimes use an old English phrase, the heophonic, to be in the presence of the heophonic. Sometimes it's good to rehydrate the language just a little bit so your imagination can flood into it. It's not all negotiated ground. He told me everything I ever did. I would be frightened of what Jesus had to say to me. In these last years where Christianity has landed upon me, I often use the image of what I'm experiencing as being rather like Jesus doing the audit in the temple, of going from room to room and kicking out the moneylenders and booting the tables over, that whole scene. Because, to be honest, like most of us, there are places that I do not want him to visit. And there are places in me encrusted and nefarious and hidden, and his lantern in those places makes my life very difficult. And in the short term, less crack, less fun. So exposure seems to be partially how the Galilee Druid works. And when I think of that, I think of actually the poet Rainer Maria Rilke. Now, don't be fooled by the word Maria. He was a man. And again, forgive me, it's a day of paraphrasing. Rainer Maria Rilke says something like this in one of his poems. What we secretly long for is to be defeated decisively by constantly greater beings. to be defeated decisively by constantly greater beings. So in other words, a life of service. Now, have you heard that before? Beatitudes ringing any bells at this point? So we wait at the well, and I think we're all waiting at the well, actually. I think it's a lovely Irish expression, which I think is the root of almost everything that matters in life. You ready? This is it. Cop onto yourself. Cop onto yourself. If you have indeed copped onto yourself, you're going to be probably not your biggest fan by this point, and you are ready to sit by the well and have the encounter with the teacher and risk the exposure, as I say, that comes not to shame but to free you. But to be exposed to heaven like that, or the possibility of heaven, that's going to involve a choice. Remember, free will, and we don't have to go that way. I've been finishing a book, and at the end of the book, I was sitting in bed proofreading it one day. It was a Sunday, and I suddenly wrote a sentence, or the sentence wrote me, or I got written by the sentence, and it said this: in every experience of beauty, we are being prepared for eternity. In every experience of beauty, we are being prepared for eternity. I barely knew what that meant, but I knew it was everything I've ever meant, and everything I've ever written about, and everything that I have thought about or tried to cultivate in my own life. And I suppose eternity, the really wonderful part of eternity, is this notion of heaven, is the Hiaphonlic. And so, what on earth could eternity mean? And, I could use all sorts of academic and philosophical discourses, and I do have a few of them tucked away in here. But I would say, for the uses of simplicity, eternity is where we go when we die. And maybe it could be that the things that we focus on and give libation to during our lives, what we're preoccupied with, gathers energy. And at the end of our life, magnetically, we find ourselves drawn to somewhere in the spectrum of experience that forms itself into what could be considered a heavenly or even a hellish state. Now, it is not up for me to judge where anybody is going on that. That is too big for any human being to figure out. That is to do with the nuance of God. But I'm interested in that idea that actually there is a reason to cleave to the good. It's good for our health, it's good for our mental health, it's good for our soul, it's good predominantly actually for people around us. So here we all are, we're all women at the well, we're all waiting for the teacher, some of us at least. So she has a big question to think about, and this is the question that you find in almost all the myths, really. What do I love? What will it cost? How much am I prepared to pay? What do I love? What will it cost? How much am I prepared to pay? That underpins most of the stories. And it actually reminds me of a Mongolian story that I think I will finish with today. There was a sickness that came over the tents of Mongolia, spread out into the desert. And in one of the tents, there was a young lad. His name was Tava. And Tava got really sick. He got really pale. His eyes rolled back in his head. And his old grandmother, who was in the tent, she became convinced that the lad, unfortunately, had died. So she started to wail and keen in the tradition of her people. Well, when your grandmother starts keening over you like that, well, they know more than you do. So you tend to assume you are moribund and defunct yourself. So the spirit of the boy flies out of his body and goes to the underworld. And he meets the Khan, who is the king of the underworld. And the Khan sort of inspects him and, open your mouth, let me look at your tongue, sort of pats him, ruffles his hair and says, listen, kid, you're terribly sick, but you're not actually dead. You're not dead. You're going to recover. You may have a bit of a limp, but you're going to recover. But I tell you what, I am a benevolent king of the underworld. Go and have a look round and bring back a memento so people know that you were actually here. So he does just that. And I've got to be honest, for the first few hours, it's a Mongolian boy's playground down there. It truly is. There are big wraps of felt that he realizes he could bring home and keep his family tent warm during the winter. That'd be a great gift. There are big, furry, funky hats. He's going to look pretty cool wearing one of those hats. There are filigreed blades that would look great on his hip. There are hunting birds. There are eagles he could have on his arm. There are books of vellum with strange Gaelic script on them. How they got there, I don't know. But he's looking around and he is beset with choice. There's a tyranny of choice down there, rather like modern life. But then, in the shadows, he sees exactly what it is he wants, and he goes to the Khan and he tugs on the, tugs on the Khan, and he says, that is what I want to bring back to my people. And so the Khan kind of whistles through his teeth because he says, well, I do know about that gift, and I have to say that it comes with kind of prohibitions, it comes with weight, it comes with consequence. But if you want it, I'll give it to you. And the boy says, yes, give me all the stories, all the legends, and all the myths of my people. Let me be a culture maker. Let me be a culture maker. Let me bring those things back to blow on the embers of my tribal mind so we come back to ourselves and remember ourselves. So the Khan did indeed blow those stories into the young lad's chest, and he just banged his way back into the tent. Everybody is wailing and gnashing and rolling back and forward and banging their heads on the bits of wood that keep the tent together. And he just sits straight upright with his eyes wide open. Everybody stops. And for about 30 seconds, he has this wonderful moment where he looks round and he sees the shimmery, blurry figures of mum and dad and granny and grandpa and the kids and the assembled people from the other tents. He sees all of the warmth of the hearth fire and all of that belonging, all of that goodness. And then the tent flaps open, and coming in are two enormous ravens. And the ravens pay no attention to anybody else. I don't even know if people can see those ravens, but they swoop down onto the lad, and they take his right eye and they take his left eye. Utter darkness he experiences, but it is not a hopeless darkness. It's not a futile darkness. It is not a deathly darkness. It's a lively darkness. It's a pregnant darkness. It's a fertile darkness. Because as he dwells in it, this amazing thing starts to happen to him. Floating up through the darkness are the images and the stories that he has curated in his heart from the other place. And with no distraction now in front of him, he starts to recount these stories like a blind Homer, like an Olav, a chief bard, to his people. And gradually they stop and they listen. And for the first time, they have a griot among them, they have a shanachie among them, they have a skald among them, they have a storyteller amongst them. And his stories curl out from the tent into other tents and other tents and other tents, and they begin to bring hope back. They begin to bring cultural memory back to people that had profoundly lost their ways. That is what sickness can look like. It's not always a sweaty brow, it's a condition of the soul. And he lived for a long time, did Tava. Maybe the stories were a well of remembrance he had in himself, and maybe when he looks down in that well, he can see Jacob and Esau, he can see the fur of the coat, and he can see all the wit of the people floating up towards him, all the grief, all the stories. So I find myself here today, standing again at the well, feeling exposed, risking the exposure, because at this point in life, what is there to lose, It's all to gain. I ask us again, what do we love? What will it cost? How much am I prepared to pay?